the learning should be in the merit, their neshamas, their souls. They should have an aliyah, which means they should go up even higher in the world above. So we very much appreciate that. This week happens to be is actually my bar mitzvah parsha, so it happens to be it's a very special parsha to me. In fact, the halachic Jewish day that just passed, the fast day was actually my birthday. So I turned 37, and I'm starting to see why professional sports people retire about this age, because when I was sitting on the floor earlier with some of my kids, after sitting there for a few minutes, I didn't feel like I was 36 anymore when I was trying to stand up. So getting a little stiff. So I can see why professional sports players are retiring in their late 30s. It happens to be, I believe this is the only parsha in the Torah which is what we call sasim, which literally means closed. But what it actually refers to is that it's very hard to find the starting place. If you're reading this parsha inside a Torah, inside a Torah scroll, it's hard to find the right place because it's like in the middle of a column. Usually, a parsha starts and there's like a gap. It's like a new paragraph, or there's a space in the text. But this Parshas Vayechi, in fact, doesn't start like that. It's right the last word in last week's parsha, Ma'od, is then followed directly without any gaps or breaks or paragraphs changes from the word to the word Vayechi. And the first verse in this week's parsha is Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim. Jacob was in the land of Egypt, Shva Esrei Shana, for 17 years. Vayehi Yemei Yaakov Shnei Chayav, and the days of the years of Jacob's life were Sheva Shanim, V'arbayim Ashana. He was 147 that's the age he got to by the end of his life. So why the question is, why was this particular parsha the one where it was closed? Why is there no gap? Why is there no break? Somebody forgot to press enter on the keypad or something like that. What's the story over here? So it's not something that's ignored. In fact, Rashi, commentating on the parsha, says asks this very question: why is it closed like this? Why is there no break? Why is there no gap? And he says, well, because it was in this week's parsha, Jacob dies, the great patriarch. In fact, we understand that Jacob is perhaps what we call the choicest, the highest, the best of the three forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the pinnacle. It builds up to him. And he's the greatest. And so in this week's parsha, he dies. And in this week's parsha, as a result of that, the eyes and the hearts of the Jewish people, of Yisrael, were closed up from the pain of the servitude that would then follow as in the following years after Jacob's death. Because after that, shortly after Jacob's death, the Egyptians began to enslave the Jewish people. So again, it's kind of trying to say basically their hearts and their eyes were closed up. It's almost like that's why it's closed in that way. So there's a few kind of curious things about that. How do we exactly understand that point? So what does it mean that their hearts and their eyes, their hearts and their eyes were closed up as a result of this suffering? So I guess what it's trying to allude to is, when we have difficult things that occur to us in our lives, we kind of close up, we put a hand over our eyes, and kind of we scrunch our body up, and we kind of feel a pain in our heart when we hear of difficult news or difficult times that are happening to ourselves, our family, or the Jewish people. And perhaps I think that's what it's alluding to over here. But again, we still have to ask, though, why was it when Jacob died specifically, that what was it about his death that suddenly now the Jewish people realize, we're not in a great situation over here. We're in a difficult place. So Rav Moshe Feinstein, who was one of the great American rabbis in the 20th century, originally came from Lithuania, set up a yeshiva in New York, and was the greatest rabbi in the Lithuanian world during the second part of the 20th century. So he says that when the Jewish people, when the Hebrews, if you like, when they got down to Egypt, believe it or not, they got pretty comfortable pretty quickly. Sound a little familiar, right? Jews in America. They got comfortable, everything was fine, they kind of started enjoying the life. Remember, once Jacob had gone down to the land of Egypt, actually the famine that was supposed to last for 5 more years actually stopped. And there was plenty. There was plenty of food, there was plenty of sustenance for everybody. And the Hebrews, the Hebrew family that came from Jacob, started to grow in numbers, and they started to become really rather comfortable. And the Jewish people, the Hebrews, they forgot that actually they were in a guest country, that they were actually not really in the place where they're supposed to be, which was the land of Israel. They got too comfortable. They unpacked their bags and everything seemed to go just great. And they got used to this. But then when they realized that they needed to get permission from Pharaoh to take Jacob's body back to the land of Israel, they realized then that they weren't in control of their own destiny, that they weren't in control of their own decisions, and that even something almost as trivial as just escorting a body back to what they understood to be the greatest piece of land, the land of Israel, they realized they had to get permission for that. And they realized at that moment, wow, we're not in the best place. We're actually subservient to another power, to another being, and that being the pharaohs. And they realized as a result of that, everything that was going to come now we've lost this great man, Jacob, all the negative things that are going to come of that, and therefore they closed their eyes, they closed their hearts. And that's why this Parsha, Rashi is alluding to the fact, that's why this Parsha is closed in the way that it's written in the Torah. That's one answer that is offered in this week's Parsha. Any questions or thoughts on that? Please feel free to interrupt me at any time or interject with comments or questions.
I forgot what it's called. Tikkun, maybe, where you could see the actual...
So I don't believe we have one here, but you would certainly see, if you saw it in a Tikkun, that is the right word. Yeah, if you were to look inside a Tikkun, which has how it's actually written in the Torah, you'd actually understand, you'd see what that point would be. So the Parsha goes on, and the days of Jacob's life are coming to a close, and he brings forward close his son Joseph, and he says, please, you have to promise me you're gonna bury me in the land of Egypt. Excuse me, in the land of Israel. Of course, they are currently in Egypt. Oh, you have one there. Okay, feel free to show her while I carry on. So, what is then interesting is that when Jacob is talking to his son Joseph, if you like, remember this was always his beloved son, really should have been his first son, because Joseph came from the wife Rachel, who Jacob ultimately and initially had wanted to marry. So in many ways, Joseph is seen as the firstborn son. And on page 270, and 270, if you happen to be looking inside, verse 5, he says, and now your two sons, again, Jacob speaking to Joseph, says, your two sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before my coming to you in Egypt, shall be mine, Ephraim and Manasseh. Thou should be like Reuben and Shimon. So, very strange. In what way? So we actually know that the Ephraim and Manasseh actually become two of the tribes. When the Jews go into the land of Israel ultimately, when the land is divided up into the portions of who receives what land. So actually, Joseph essentially received a double portion through his sons. There's no portion of Joseph; it's through his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. They received a double portion. Now, something very interesting. You may be familiar in Torah law of something called the double portion. The oldest son receives double all of the others when it comes to inheritance. So it's very easy if a person has two sons. The older son gets 2/3, and the younger son gets 1/3. The math for that is very simple. What if a person has 4 sons? So what you always have to do is you have to add another part. So now instead of there being 4 quarters, there's 5 parts equally of 20% each. And the oldest son gets 40%, and the other 3 sons get 20, 20, 20. And that fills your 100%. So the oldest son has still got double what the other sons have got. That's called in Hebrew pi shnayim. It's a double amount, it's a double quantity. And usually the oldest son, which in terms of Jacob should have been Reuben, should have received that double portion. What we see that comes through through the Parsha over here is that Jacob is bringing Joseph close to him on his deathbed and saying, you know what? Actually, you're going to get the double portion. Your sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, they're both going to each get their own part of the land of Israel. Well, sounds nice enough, except for a couple of problems. One, Joseph wasn't the firstborn. I mean, however way you want to swing it, Joseph was in fact the 11th born out of Jacob's 12 sons. And on top of that, there's actually a separate mitzvah. I'm sure Rabbi Unger has discussed this with those that study with him on a continual basis in the past. There's a mitzvah later on in the book of Deuteronomy where a person is actually not allowed to favor the younger son by giving them the double portion. The case specifically is where a man is married to two wives and he has a firstborn son with both of those wives. It happens to be that he likes the second wife a lot more than the first wife. And he wants to give the birthright, that double portion to the son of the woman that he loves. The Torah says you can't do that. That's asur, that's forbidden. You're simply not allowed to do that. Yeah, what we see over here is exactly that. His beloved was always Rachel. We see that. It was even after, and we'll come on to this point a little bit later, after Rachel died, Yaakov moves his bed into the tent of not Leah, but into the tent of Bilhah, which was Rachel's maidservant, to which Reuven was incensed and furious, and we'll actually come on to that in a little bit. So Yaakov almost is negating this very commandment that we see later on in the Torah of favoring the son of the one that he loves, even though he's not the firstborn son. Yosef is not the firstborn. Reuven is the firstborn. He should be getting the double portion when they go into the land of Israel. So how do we possibly understand that? I don't know, any thoughts or questions, comments on that? How could it be that Jacob was able to give that double portion to Joseph when he wasn't the firstborn son?
Well, he had achieved a tremendous amount of holiness by keeping what he understood to be Torah, even while he was surrounded by Egyptians and Egyptian culture.
Right.
So he knew that Joseph was the one that was like the most holy.
Right. I think you have to say an answer of that nature. It was obviously something about Joseph and what he actually represented in terms of he was almost the continuation of what the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, represented. And many commentators actually point out that in many ways Joseph was like the hidden fourth forefather, as a matter of fact. That's what many of the deeper commentaries actually say. And that he almost represented that bridge between the forefathers and the other sons. In fact, what we actually see at the end of this week's Parsha is that the Torah also tells us that Joseph died in this week's Parsha when he was 110 years old. And then at the beginning of the book of Shema, of Exodus, it says that Joseph and his brothers died. So actually Joseph's death is mentioned twice, both at the very end of this week's Parsha and then again with his brothers in next week's Parsha. In other words, Joseph, as you were saying, is almost this bridge. He's this person who is able to elevate or be elevated above the brothers because he spent time in Egypt, yet he was still able to rise up against all the challenges that he faced there. This is why we call him Yosef HaTzadik, Yosef the righteous one, whereas almost nobody else in the whole of the Torah and the prophets is given that term of HaTzadik, of the righteous one. So he represents something elevated, something greater, and also this bridge between the forefathers and the 12 tribes, and then the rest of the journey of the Jewish people once they're in Egypt, and then go through servitude and freedom, redemption, and giving of the Torah. It's Joseph who represents that connection. In fact, in the blessing to Joseph that we see later on in the Parsha, when Jacob is blessing the sons, it says over here that, and if you want to see it inside, it's on page 282, 283. It said Jacob says about his son, he describes him is that he was the stone of Israel. That's how he describes Jacob. Excuse me. That's how Jacob describes Joseph. Yeah. Just one moment. Right, and the commentator there, the Onkelos, essentially saying is actually interesting. If you look at the word even, which is the Hebrew word for stone, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, those of you who had a little bit familiar with the word in Hebrew, even means stone. It's actually a combination of two very simple words that even those with a very simple understanding of Hebrew know. The word of, which means father, and ben, which means son. Even. And even is this stone, but it's this connector. It's this, in other words, what is a stone? It's another brick in the wall in terms of creating the overall puzzle, the overall piece, the overall picture of who, in this case, who the Jewish people are. And therefore, even in the blessing that Jacob gives to Joseph, there's the hint. He's saying to his son, "You're the Even Yisrael. You're the Av Ben. You're the Av Ben relationship. You're the father-son relationship. You're the thing that represents who I am and who I want to be and what the whole nation of Israel, the destiny, will surely become." And that's hidden there. That's hinted to even in the blessing that Jacob gives to Joseph. And therefore, in this specific case, it was acceptable. I guess the truth is this is before the Torah had been given. So in some ways, Jacob is allowed to negate certain rules of the Torah because he wasn't yet commanded in them. The Jewish people are only commanded in the Torah several Parshas later once we received the Torah collectively at Mount Sinai. Until that point, with the forefathers and the foremothers, they generally, we understood, kept the 613 mitzvot, but were, if they felt there was a great need, were able to stray from them for a greater purpose, then they were able to do so. And in this case, Jacob clearly felt that his son Joseph represented the Av Ben, the Even, the stone, the next piece, the next brick in the wall that's going to help build the Jewish people, and therefore he deserves to get that double portion, which is why the Ephraim and Manasseh get 2 parts of the land of Israel when the Jewish people finally go in and conquer the land of Israel.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the tribe of Levi does not get a portion.
Right.
Correct.
It's supported by the community.
Right.
So that's 12 portions now.
Right.
But who are considered the 12 tribes?
Well, it's the 12 tribes essentially are the 12 sons of Jacob. However, what I've been referring to is specifically in relation to property inheritance. This thing that I've been talking about, this Pishnayim, this double portion, and which is relevant even today, it refers to inheritance of wealth and property and land, which is why when it came to what we're talking about over here, that's why Ephraim and Manasseh get that double portion of land. It doesn't mean that they are their own, they're not separate tribes, but they are separate, to some extent, separate tribes in the fact that they get their own piece of the land of Israel. But the 12 sons of Jacob are essentially that they are the 12 pillars that go on to form the Jewish people. But in terms of inheritance, Joseph gets a double portion. I hope that's clear. So Jacob, carrying on in the Parsha, going back to page 270 and onwards there. So Jacob then gives Ephraim and Manasseh a blessing, and it's very interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah,
He switches them.
Right, right. As some of you may know, Ephraim is on the left of Jacob, and Jacob's blessing his grandsons here. He switches his hands. He puts his right hand on Ephraim, even though he was the younger one, and the left on Manasseh. So that's the picture, something like this that would have been exampled while he was blessing his grandsons. Generally, in Jewish thought, we understand that the right is the stronger hand. It's the hand, or it's the predominant hand. We understand generally it's the hand of giving. It's the hand of chesed. The left generally represents gevura, which actually means strength, or the strength to rein in. The right hand is the strength, is the hand, or is the side in Jewish thought that gives out. It's actually interesting, by the way, just to divert slightly, my name in Hebrew is Binyomin, which really is Benyamin, which means right hand, which son of right. And my wife's name is actually Gevura, which is this strength, which is represented usually by the left, which is the ability to rein in. So the right gives out, the left takes in. So hopefully together we're a good combination with God's continual help and strength. So, but that's just interesting, by the way. So generally though, when a Rabbi or a tzaddik or a righteous person is giving a blessing, so they put their right hand on top. Certainly their right hand. And their left hand perhaps also, but certainly their right hand. That's in Jewish thought what represents the blessing.
That's why the mezuzah's on the right?
I never heard that. You heard that?
Well, it could be. No, it could be that is the reason. Why specifically on the right?
You just had a whole lecture on mezuzah.
Yeah, did he say why it was on the right?
Well, he said it should be on the right, but he didn't say why.
He didn't say why.
Okay.
So you have to write that down and ask him. It could well be so that the right hand goes up and kisses it, even though there's not specific mitzvah to kiss the mezuzah, but it's a custom that was developed. So he crosses his hands and he blesses his grandson.
No, you're supposed to put your right shoe on first.
Right. Yeah, there is an order.
Unless you have what if you're left-handed is another.
Right.
So there's a lot of right-handed bias.
Right. The truth is, I am left-handed, so some of the halachas do
So's my
change.
son, yeah.
Some of the halachas do change when you're left-handed. But
Right, with the filling and everything.
so a couple of questions that come from this: why does Jacob bless Ephraim or predominantly give him the stronger blessing, the more important blessing? Why does he see fit? Now, that's one question, and just to understand that question a little better. Mm-hmm. If you look throughout the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, what you're seeing, or certainly with Abraham and Isaac, what you're seeing is favoritism.
Oh, yeah.
What you're seeing is a really a very difficult thing, is that Abraham ultimately had to banish his son, his firstborn son, Ishmael, from his house. On Sarah's advice, she had enough with him and Hagar, Ishmael's mother. And she said, go. They've got to go. Abraham had to banish them. You had that sibling rival. You had that strife in the house. By Yitzchak, he has even worse, really. Yaakov and Esau, battling, fighting, squabbling, cheating, lying in order to get that birthright from Yitzchak Avinu, from Isaac. And now you've got Yaakov, who again, himself perhaps didn't learn from father and grandfather. He created similar strife. That's all the stories we've just been reading the past 3 weeks of how Yosef had these dreams and his brothers hated him, the Torah says explicitly, and all this terrible feeling and negativity that's invoked. Ultimately the brothers want to kill him, but then sell him, and everything that is novea that comes out that stems from that. This has not been a happy family.
No.
This is not. This is not. You won't want to be at this family's Shabbos table. Can you imagine? I mean, they're talking about a dysfunctional Jewish family.
Right.
This is it. Our family, our first family, is entirely dysfunctional.
Yeah.
Backstabbing and lashon hara, speaking negatively. We see that's how Joseph was going to report on his brothers, the sons of Leah. Tells us explicitly he brought bad reports to his father. I mean, this is not a bar mitzvah celebration that's going to go down well. There better be a good band at this bar mitzvah, otherwise the party is not going to be particularly fun, and plenty of alcohol too. That's the only way you could get through. But in all seriousness, there's clearly a lot of dysfunction in this family. There's a lot of squabbling. There's a lot of backstabbing.
And deception.
And now, the last chapter, essentially, the last chapters in this book, we still apparently haven't learned. Because here you go, Jacob, not happy enough that the generation after him, his 12 sons, have the squabbling and the infighting. He's now seemingly ready to start another fight up with the next generation down, Ephraim and Manasseh, who are the great-great-grandsons of Abraham, no less. So what's going on over here? What's Jacob thinking? I said earlier, this man, this tzaddik, Jacob, is the highest of all of the forefathers. Yet he thinks to do this. He thinks to create more family squabbles. Isn't it bad enough already? I don't know. What does the people think?
He knew that Ephraim was going to be a greater.
Right. So that's an answer that Rashi gives. That Ephraim, who came from Ephraim. Well, let's see. What does Rashi say over here?
Every Friday night.
Right. That's not bad. I thought there was a Rashi on that, but okay. Yeah. Okay, but he doesn't say. I thought Rashi said, but that's fine. But he understood that from him, great people will come out. So again, so what is Yaakov doing over here? Why does he see fit to perhaps to perhaps actually do that? It's a little difficult. So obviously the answer, he saw that from Ephraim will come even greater leaders for the Jewish people, and so even though that may create the sibling rivalry or the squabbles or the fracturing, nevertheless, he felt still that was important to give the younger one that blessing. And he had understood perhaps from his own life that even though somebody may be the younger one, i.e. in this case himself, nevertheless, the blessing has to go. And when we say the blessing, the extra koach, the extra power of a blessing, it has to go to whoever needs it, whoever it rightfully should go to, in terms of who deserves it. Jacob, when he was getting the blessing from his father Isaac, understood he deserves this. He has earned the right for this blessing from his father Isaac. And even though he may be the younger of the twins, nevertheless, the blessing goes to him. Similarly now, Jacob understood, look, it may not be politically correct to give it to Ephraim over Manasseh. Nevertheless, that's where the blessing goes. I see great leaders that will come from Ephraim, and therefore that is what is needed to be. And, sometimes when it comes to leadership, it's not just about doing the politically correct thing or the thing that seems to be, the popular thing, but it's about doing the right thing, the thing that's in the best interests of the nation, of the people, and in this case of the spiritual future of the nation of Israel. And actually, what's that?
There were probably a whole bunch of other grandsons that didn't get a blessing.
There were later on there were additional children born.
These two were the first two
Right.
grandsons?
The
other brothers had no children at that time?
Oh no, sorry, he had other grandsons. Yes, that's correct.
They didn't get blessed.
Seemingly not.
So that wasn't going to make
Seemingly
the
not. I
others
mean,
happy either.
right. The other
No
11,
one is that bad.
the brothers all get blessed.
Who's happy?
You're right. There's an interesting point. The brothers all get blessed, but Ephraim and Manasseh are the only grandchildren that seemingly get blessed. That's actually a very interesting point. I never thought about that. Now, it was mentioned over here, this is the blessing that we give to sons on a Friday night, in Erev Yom Kippur. You should be like Yisimcha Elakim Ephraim v'Manasseh. God should place you like Ephraim and Manasseh.
Right.
The question is, why is this the blessing we now say?
Right.
Why should we? Because it's interesting. By the girls, we say Yisimech Elakim Kasar Rivka Rachel v'Leah. God should make you like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Right. So, by the girls we say the foremothers.
Right.
By the boys we say the great grandchildren of Abraham.
Yeah.
By these two people. Oh, why is that? So, it's actually, I think, a beautiful answer. There's a couple of cool answers given. One is that we know that boys like to fight a lot. Look, what is the story?
This is Rabbi Frank. This is Rabbi
Good
David.
evening, how are you? It's nice to see you.
I just drove back from Boston. I didn't want to miss it.
Oh, lovely to see you. Good evening. So look, If you look back at the very beginning of the Torah, and you look at relationships and brothers, you see that the first two brothers, one killed the other. It's not a good start. And as the Chumash in the book of Genesis continues, what is it littered with? Brotherly envy and hatred. That is what the whole book, almost really, that's the theme that runs through all these 50 chapters of the book of Genesis. Ephraim and Manasseh, one is given the blessing over the other. In previous generations, that's caused problems. Look how Cain reacted to Abel. He was jealous. He didn't like the way that, in this case, almost their Avichem Shebashamayim, their God that was in heaven, rejoiced to Abel's offering, and to Cain's offering, Lo Sha'a. Hashem, God, did not rejoice. And that didn't end well.
No.
Ephraim, Manasseh could have got jealous, he could have got envious, he could have got upset. Do we see any of that? No, we don't. We see no trace at all of brotherly envy or hatred as a result of Ephraim getting the predominant blessing. So what do we see here? Finally, with Manasseh and Ephraim, we finally got to a generation of people in the world where there's not brotherly hatred, where one can accept the situation of the other with love and with acceptance. And those of us that have had boys, or even not, we understand that the nature of boys is to be competitive, envious. Still to this day, it's the men that are fighting the battles and women who are trying to make peace and heal the world. I think that's still a general rule. No, you don't agree with that?
We try.
No, tell me why I'm wrong.
No, we said we tried.
The women are not always.
Not all like that, but
How do we know that there's no hard feelings between the two? What's your basis for saying that?
because there's no evidence of that.
Yeah,
See,
but
no, but here, okay, with all the other squabbles that I've mentioned, Cain and Abel,
yeah.
Ishmael and Isaac, there's clearly an undertone there of squabbles going on in the house. There's bad things happening in the house. That's why Sarah said they got to get out of here.
Yeah.
You know, Jacob and Esau, there's a lot of text on that.
Horrifying.
Joseph and his brothers, plenty of text on that too. Even in this week's Parsha, after Jacob dies, the 11 brothers, they go to Joseph and they're like, "Oh no, you're going to get us now, right? Because our father's gone." You know, so you see, I think 5 cases there. I just example that where you see in the text, in case of Ephraim and Manasseh, there would be good reason to create envy and jealousy,
Yes.
but there's nothing mentioned. So in the lack of nothing being mentioned, as opposed to the other cases where plenty was detailed, I think it's fair to say, and this is what the commentators point out, that there was no negative reaction as a result of Jacob's bracha to his grandsons. And therefore, we want our boys to be the peace lovers, the